I'm Barbara Lee Diamondstein, and welcome to Fashion, the Inside Story. Today we will be talking to Oscar de la Renta. Dominican-born Oscar de la Renta was one of the first American fashion designers to mass market his products. Today, his label is found on over 80 different items, everything from high-fashioned to household linens, sunglasses, umbrellas, and even the National Boy Scout uniform. A very warm welcome to you, Oscar. Why and under what circumstances did you leave the Dominican Republic?
Well, I went to art school in the Dominican Republic. I was going through art school at the same time I was going through high school, and graduated, did my first one-man show of my paintings when I was 17 years old, and sort of I convinced my mother, and my mother convinced my father that I should go to Spain to study painting. You know, my mother was sort of a very strong influence in my life. I mean, she loved clothes, and she sort of loved to dress well. And my mother used to go quite often to Cuba, to Havana. She thought it was a wonderful, fabulous city, very gay, sort of wonderful people. And there was a very famous store in Havana called El Encanto, who was the only sort of store in Latin America that carried all kind of European clothes. And my mother used to buy all of her clothes there. You know, though there was not really a fashion industry in my country as per se, I think that the Latin woman sort of cares a lot about dressing. So I did see some people sort of fairly well dressed, though I never at that point ever thought of being a fashion designer. I mean, it never entered my mind.
Well, there you were in Madrid studying art and suddenly became a fashion illustrator, as I understand it.
Well, my mother died when I was 19. My father remarried 2 years later and said enough of that nonsense of wanting to be a painter, to want to come back to the Dominican Republic. He wanted me to go into my father's business. He was in the insurance business, and he thought that I should go back and sell insurances. I wasn't really making any money with my work then, and I thought that one of the commercial aspects of being a painter was that probably because I could draw very well, I could make some fashion illustrations, and I started doing fashion illustrations for newspapers and for magazines in Spain, and I was making a little bit of money, and going into the fashion houses and looking at the clothes and designing the clothes, I started sort of, while I was waiting for the model to change, I said, well, if I would have made that dress, I would have made it differently. And I started doing sketches of my own. And one day a friend of mine saw those sketches, and he showed my sketches to Balenciaga, who was then obviously a very well-established designer already in France. He saw my sketches and saw that I was very talented and my sketches were very good, and asked me if I would like to come to work in his place as an illustrator. But at that time, it was quite customary that you will take young people and train them, and at the same time they will do some sort of job, picking pins and doing all sorts of things. And that is really what I was doing at Balenciaga.
And what caused you to move on from there?
I never thought that I would give up painting at that point. That came much later. I thought that if I was going to be in fashion, and probably that was something that was compatible with painting, the best place to be was Paris, and at that point. And I don't think in those terms anymore now. But I asked Balenciaga if I could go and work in his house in Paris, and he said, well, I couldn't take in my studio now because I really would like you to stay here for a while more, perhaps another year, and then you will come to Paris. But I was very, very impatient, and with the help of my sisters, the financial assistants of my sister were all married, I was able to go to Paris. I immediately started at the top. The first house I went to was Dior. I went to Christian Dior with my sketches, and I said I was looking for a job as an assistant designer. What is amusing about this story is that this is just the point back in 1959, I think, that where Yves Saint Laurent has left
Christian
Dior, and he had some kind of a nervous breakdown and left Dior. And Dior was in the process of engaging Marc Bohan, but it hasn't been officially announced yet. And when I showed my sketches to the lady who was at the head of the studio, Madame Marguerite was her name, she liked my sketches, so I was very talented, and she offered me a job. She said, I don't know what you will be doing because we are reorganizing our studio, but we will love you to work for us. very little money, $150 a month. And, but I was very, very happy, of course.
For the opportunity.
For the opportunity. That same afternoon, I was walking in the street, in Paris, which is a big city, and I met this Spanish friend of mine, and he asked me what I was doing. I explained, and he said, well, there's a very good friend of mine who is at the head of Lanvin, a designer by the name of Antonio Castillo, and he's looking for an assistant. Why don't you go and see him? So I went with my sketches to see Castillo, and he loved my sketches. And again, he offered me a job. Before offering me the job, he asked me, did I know how to drape?
And we know by now that you didn't.
And I say yes. and he looked at my sketches and he said, I would love you to come and work as my assistant. And he said, well, actually, I came at the insistence of this friend because I have already accepted a job at Dior. And he said, how much money are they paying you? And I say, well, they offered me $200. And he said, well, what about if I pay you $250? And I say, fine. It's not like to come and work with you. I say, nevertheless, I need to go back to Spain and pick up my clothes, and I really couldn't start before 3 or 4 weeks. And he said, well, that will be fine. And I asked for a letter, and an engagement letter. And then that evening, I went through the yellow pages, and my French then was very, very bad.
I think you were looking for a school.
And I looked for a fashion school, and I took the biggest sign, and I went to the school the following morning, and I asked for, it was a private school, I asked for, for the head teacher, and I told her the whole story. I said, I accepted this job yesterday. These are my sketches. They asked me if I knew how to drape, and I say yes, and I don't. So would you teach me to drape in 2 weeks? And she said yes.
In addition to Balenciaga and Castillo, you've worked for Elizabeth Arden.
That was my first job in the United States.
How did being apprenticed to these great designers influence you in your work and your design aesthetic?
Working with Balenciaga and Castillo, obviously, it's a great influence, was a great influence in my career. And though I really never worked that much with Balenciaga himself, I was obviously very much in contact with all his clothes, and probably that was the designer that most admired and most identified with at that time.
Did you learn the most from him too?
Yes, I learned a lot from him. The very interesting thing about Castillo, he made really very beautiful clothes, and I think that probably my sense for evening clothes really comes much more from Castillo in a way that it comes from Balenciaga. And it's interesting because Mrs. Gloria Guinness, used to dress from both the designers. They were both very close friends, and she probably, half of her wardrobe was Balenciaga, half of her wardrobe was, Castillo. And she died 2 years ago. And about 3 or 4 years ago, I asked her, what have you done with all your old clothes? And she said, well, I gave all my Balenciagas away to the Metropolitan when they had that Balenciaga show, and to the Victoria and Albert Museum in England. And I said, what happened to your Castillo clothes? I said, well, those I never gave away because all his evening clothes I still wear. What is interesting is that he designed clothes that were not really particularly important in that period, but that are sort of timeless clothes, while Balenciaga designed clothes that are so strong for the period that he designed his clothes, that I think it would be very difficult today to wear a Balenciaga dress for a woman, which will not look dated.
How can you have fashion on the one hand and timelessness on the other?
There are certain things that are classics, like a men's gray flannel suit. The same thing goes for a lady's sweater. I think that if you have a sweater that is a classic, sweater in the sense of, of a classic shape, it lasts far much longer than something that makes a very strong point of view, at that time. I think that the eyes get tired of things that are very exaggerated, you see, and that is why it changes.
We left you a moment ago in Paris. Perhaps you might tell us, I guess it's been nearly 20 years that you are in New York now, how you wended your way from there to here.
There were quite a few of my friends in Paris that have come to New York to work and were doing very well and were making a lot of money. Up to that time, I have worked with high fashion houses where ready-to-wear was really very unimportant, and I felt that in New York, they have a much better understanding of ready-to-wear and mass marketing and all those sort of things that they had in France at that point, besides the money. The first day that I arrived in New York, I was staying in a hotel on Madison Avenue, and a friend of mine called me at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I asked me if I had a black tie, and I said yes, and I said, are you too tired? I said no. I said, would you like to come to, there's a charity ball, tonight, and I need an extra man. Would you like to come? This friend of mine was working in public relations. And I said yes, so I went to this charity ball, and at the table I was sitting next to Elizabeth Arden. Antonio Castillo, whom I was working for in Paris, had worked for 5 years for Elizabeth Arden. And of course I knew a lot about her. And one very important fact about Arden, and she was an extraordinary lady and already on her 80s, is that she loved to fire people, but she hated anyone who ever left her. Once she had learned that I was, a designer working in Paris, she asked, whom do you work for? I say, I work for Castillo. And she say, oh, Castillo, he used to work for me. I say, yeah, I seem to remember he mentioned your name one time. Obviously, and I knew everything about his 5 years at Arden, and she immediately said, you should really come and work in the States. And I say, oh, I love Paris, it's a wonderful city, and probably, in a few years, I might decide to come to work here. I said, but New York is so much more exciting, and you can make so much more money. I say, obviously, if I will find an extraordinary, irresistible offer, I might consider, but, and down the evening, she came back to me again, and she said, well, why don't you come to see me tomorrow? I would love to see your sketches. And I said, well, I have some sketches that I picked up as I was leaving Paris to give my sisters. But, that is just some things that I picked, and it's not really a representation of my work. It's not the portfolio that I prepared to look, for a job. They're not my best sketches, which, of course, they were. And so anyway, the following day, the secretary called and asked me to come and see her. And I went to see her at noon, and she went through my sketches very fast, and then she said, I would love you to come and work for me. I designed a collection for me. Again, I said, I'm not looking for a job. She said, well, what do you call an irresistible offer? And at that point, I was making in Paris $350 a month. So I saved $500 a week, and she said, you got a job.
How did you get the publicity that you needed when you first started out here in New York?
A friend of mine in Paris, who was working at French Vogue, who then turned out years later to be my wife, gave me a letter of introduction for Diana Brilliant, and I called Diana Brilliant, and she asked me to come and have tea with her on a Sunday. And she said, what are you doing here? What's what you want to do? I told her, and I say, actually, I have been offered 2 jobs. I have been offered a job to go and design for less money the ready-to-wear collection for Christian Dior, and I have been asked to go and work for Elizabeth Arden. And she told me, Miss Arden is a very difficult person. I said, yes, I know, because Castillo worked for her for 5 years. And Diane asked me, what is what you want in the future? And I say, I would love to be a very well-known designer of ready-to-wear clothes. And so she said, well, then you should go to Elizabeth Arden.
Fashion, the inside story, will return in a moment. We now return to Fashion, the inside story.
Does a man bring anything special to designing for women that a woman doesn't?
Yes and no. The most influential designer of the 20th century, the one who really sort of changed the way of dressing for women is a woman who was at the Chanel. I think that she really created, you know, the women's live movement. She really was the one who took women out of undergarments, and she created the modern woman of today. I think that, you know, by far, she's, you know, the most creative and the most innovative designer of the 20th century.
Well, it's been said that you, if not Freud, understands what women want. Just what is it that you think women want?
I think that this is sort of a guessing game. I probably...
What's your best guess this year?
I think that the same as every year. I think that women want to be dressed like women.
Is it possible to get designer clothes at affordable prices?
Yes. I think that, myself, I design many from lines. The dress you're wearing is from my Miso collection. Miso retails from I think $150 to about $350.
And most dresses seem to be designed for very young girls or size 6 models. How about the rest of us?
My customer is really a woman who is, over 25, 30 years old, because it's either a professional woman, a woman who works and makes a lot of money, or a woman who is married and has a rich husband. The clothes I design are the clothes that I feel comfortable and capable of designing.
But you have marketed so many other products, nearly more than 80 as I understand now. Can you tell us what some of the others are besides sunglasses and umbrellas?
I design shoes, custom jewelry. I design accessories, handbags, a full line of men's clothes, socks, shoes, clothing, shirts, sportswear, sweaters. I do a line of knitted dresses for ladies. We do the Miso line that I already mentioned. I do sheets and towels.
Oscar de la Renta is an empire that designer licensing has helped build.
Well, I have a studio and I work with 4 assistants who design with me, plus 3 other assistants that get involved in other aspects of the functioning of the studio. And we really, design practically every product that is labeled with my name.
I believe that your perfume is the #1 perfume today. Is that correct?
It's #1 in the United States. Limited distribution. Oscar de la Renta you can only buy in established, a store like Saks or Bergdorf or Bloomingdale's.
It used to be important that a scent was French perfume. That no longer seems to be the case. Who and what was responsible for that whole shift?
We worked with different perfumers, American as well as French, and it happened that the fragrance that I liked most was the one that was created by the French house. But for the markets around the world where the name of Oscar de la Renta is not as well known as in the United States, it will be much more important to have a perfume made in France with the name of Oscar de la Renta than it would be made in the United States, where there is not a tradition for making fragrance. But the fact, I like the idea that a woman wears only really one fragrance, because it becomes herself. It's part of her identity.
Part of her signature.
And if that fragrance can be Oscar de la Renta, then
that's even better. Why don't we talk about that identity for a moment? You are a kind of oracle on the subject of glamour. Perhaps you might help us define what that difficult term means. Just what is glamour? What makes a woman glamorous? Is it her clothing, her grooming, her posture, or is it really some other more mysterious quality?
Glamour. I think that it starts within oneself. You see, I think that is the image that the woman's, glamour has nothing to do with beauty. Even a badly dressed woman can have some glamour, it's sort of, but I think that the glamorous woman is a woman who has sort of a certain kind of glow, and that glow is something that she has to create for herself. For any human being, I think that the most important beauty is the inner beauty. I think that the most important beauty is the beauty, not the beauty that you are born with, but the beauty that one creates for oneself.
Being a name designer today is obviously a very serious business, too. and it requires a special business sense as well as aesthetic ingenuity. How much of your time nowadays do you spend on the bottom line rather than the hemline?
When I started on my own business in 1965, I'll spend probably 90% of the time designing clothes. Today, I probably spend like 30 or 40% of my time designing clothes. Obviously, that is the time that I like the most, that is the time that I enjoy the most. Unfortunately, you know, my business, like almost any other designer's business, has changed in the sense that, you know, the promotional aspects of it have become very, very important.
America used to be the poor cousin of the European market, and now obviously it does set the pace. How do you account for that success and that change?
Well, what happened is that, you know, for years, 7th Avenue was really controlled by manufacturer and not by designers. That really changed in my time when I came to 7th Avenue. Early in the 60s, the designers started to emerge as, you know, as the stars on the label. But up to them, what American manufacturers have been doing is that they were buying they would go to Paris, buy clothes from the European market, bring them to the States, and, you know, copy them. And, but then in the very early 60s, and even in the 50s, people like Claire McCarter, Norman Norell, those are the people who really sort of launch the importance of the American designer and who they created what this market is, you know, is today.
It's been said that good taste is almost as rare as genius. Would you agree with that, and how would you define good taste?
I think that good taste it comes from the appreciation of life. You know, I think that from the appreciation of life and from learning.
You're known to millions of Americans not only by your clothes, but by your publicity. There are not many designers that appear on the cover of the New York Times magazine or are featured with such regularity in the national and international press. What next? Where are you headed, and what are some of the plans you have?
I mean, I'm quite happy doing what I couldn't handle any more work than I'm doing, you know, right now. And I make very good money and very good living. I have a very happy life, and I'm just working hard to keep what I have.
If an actor can be an ambassador, why can't a fashion designer be an ambassador? Is that a career that you might consider?
You know, I have very strong ties to my country, to the Dominican Republic, and I have been offered more than one time to be the Dominican ambassador to, you know, to Washington. Well, I think that I am a much better ambassador by being just myself, and you know, I think that I serve my country better, my country of birth, by being Oscar de la Renta and by going there as myself, and I feel much happier as an American doing what I'm doing, because that is what I do best.
If you had it to do over again, what would you do otherwise?
Probably I would have done it the same way. I mean, there are a few mistakes, but they're not that important.
Colorful, fanciful, inspired, these are the clothes designed by Oscar de la Renta. Through his words and his work, we have seen what happens when a designer translates his love of vibrant colors, forms, and fabrics into art that can be worn. Thank you, Oscar de la Renta, for being with us today.